VESA, it's absolutely thrilling to be with you. Welcome to the Salim Ismail Podcast, where we talk about the massive transformation that's occurring in the world. You're kind of leading that transformation in the art world and bringing together multiple domains. And I can't wait to get into this conversation. So great to have you here.
Salim, thank you so very much. I've been looking forward to this ever since I kind of heard that this would be a possibility, and then kind of dwelling into your all the different kinds of thoughts and things that you've been involved in. So I've already learned a lot before we even have this conversation, and I can't wait to kind of go deeper into it now. So great to be with you.
So let's start with your background. Where did you grow up, and how did you get into the art world? And the third question I have around that is, it takes an unbelievable amount of courage to put your soul into art and then try and make a business model and a career out of it. And how do you make that jump? Because most people can't make that final leap. So give us a bit about your background.
Sure. So I was born in Finland, and a kind of interesting family background, a little bit of chaos to begin with. That led to some fairly traumatic experiences and kind of a perspective that connected me to some things that felt a little bit unusual at the time, but very natural. And then that led for me to have this compulsion to create. So I was 5 years old when I turned my parents' pots and pans into a drum kit, and kind of this started listening to James Brown and Michael Jackson. So I was this weird white boy from up north in the sort of snowland that was resonating with this kind of African rhythm, and that turned out to be eventually then that I had some bands, but my parents, who were a little bit more, my mother and stepfather that is, were a little bit more conservative leaning, and they kind of was saying that, if you want to do this whole music thing, maybe you should go into properly learn the notes and all that kind of stuff, and not just be a rock star. And, I tended to agree with them enough, and went eventually to film school. And I wanted to create these sort of immersive worlds. I was very enamored with Ridley Scott and, these great directors who were just completely transported you somewhere. And then after film school and having a production company for some time, I found myself back in Finland. I got educated in the UK. So then I found myself doing this television series about dogs, and educating people about how they could get along with their dogs. And it was kind of like this thing where I felt a little lost all of a sudden, that I wasn't going towards an A-list Hollywood career. I was paying production company bills, and I love dogs, don't get me wrong, but it's just wasn't the kind of artistic type of thing that I was going for. And then I got this idea and this is in 2008, by the way, that what if I started body painting on people and really telling the whole story of that real human being. And then, because I had gotten educated in neurolinguistic programming before, and kind of this hypnotherapeutic kind of setting to allow people to go through these things and create a new life vision and those kinds of things. And what if I did this, that I lit them and photographed them and helped facilitate this process and then capture that on camera. And then if I started painting and playing with paint and photographing those paintings, if I merged it together with Photoshop, maybe I'd have something new. And eventually what happened is this kind of evolution of what you would traditionally see as either portrait photography or portrait painting, both of them emerging into something that was originally a digital file. And that was a little bit tricky in the art world, because then when I went to them, I said, well, here's something cool. This is what we've done, these projects and all this kind of thing. And they were like, so where's your oil original? And I said, well, I don't really have one. So you sell copies. So I was kind of primed for this NFT evolution or revolution already back in the day. But philosophically, I suppose, and this is something that might be interesting, is some of the first people that I really started accelerating with my learning from was a guy called Ken Wilber, who's considered the father of integral theory. So he's the guy that I really started listening to ever since I graduated university. And that's when I realized the limitations of a state-funded education, even to the highest degree, where it was like hopping on a rocket ship to kind of starting to listen to Ken Wilber. It's like all the brakes came off, and this integral worldview started forming. And like you were saying earlier, is how I've come across this kind of idea of why I infuse so many different ideas from different fields into the art. It all pretty much stems from Ken Wilber to begin with. So it's a lot of that. Maybe that's a starting point.
So VESA, I've got like 100 things from that. Now a bunch of things click in because Ken Wilber, have a pretty good sense of, because as I told you, I'm fascinated by metaphysics, right? And I think he's done one of the more profound lessons around that. But you said something else also that I found really interesting, which is the whole neurolinguistic programming side. So did you do that to solve some internal trauma, or did you do that as an exploration to try and understand how we interact and so on?
It was first to solve my own problems,
Right.
which I believe was the Richard Bandler's journey as well. He's super interesting, that guy, and his whole journey of how he, just as a polymath and a mathematician, he read all the psychology books, and then he came to the conclusion that none of them really answered any of the problems. They were very good at diagnosing stuff, but what to do about them was not really the thing. So he set on his journey to kind of like shortcut a lot of the systems and come up with the human os X. And I thought that was fascinating. And once I got the first experiences of it, and some people helped me with some of my things with it, I realized that, okay, this works. It has its own blind spots as well, and some of the people who really get into it can be a little cultish at times as well. But I realized that some of this stuff really works, and it could work in the art context, and I could help facilitate these experiences to others, as well as kind of communicate better and more clearly with my art as well. So it was.
So you bring some of the NLP stuff into art. How do you do that?
Well, for example, let's say if I work with someone like when we did the Veena Malik project, where I worked with this Bollywood actress. This is a little bit of a decade ago, and she had quite a tumultuous life and was going through a lot at the time when we were doing this process. And she had a lot of things to let go of, and maybe some vision to where she was going, and kind of like I was trying to infuse of how it is that we could deconstruct from some of the obstacles from her life on a personal, emotional level, but how that would transcend into something that would be potentially useful for those who come across that artwork and present a future vision. And what I mean by that is one of the very profound examples where I started understanding what NLP was, is that when I met one of the first coaches, and he asked me, so VESA, where do you want to go? What do you want to do? And I started describing the things that I didn't want to do. And I was very good at describing the things that I didn't want to do. And he, of course, understood that I didn't seem to have a very good vision as to where I was going. And he said that, Vesa, how about this example, that what if you think of your brain as something like the taxi driver, and you hop in the back of a taxi, and the taxi driver asks you, so where do you want to go? And you say, not to the airport. It's like, okay, bro, what? So no, but do you want to be taken home, or is where? No, I don't really, want to go home. It's how long before the taxi driver throws you out the car and says, "Go off," basically. So you need to be able to tell your brain a direction, or otherwise you're not going to arrive anywhere. And that's when I understood the importance of like future authoring, so to speak, or how to start going that way. So that's what I thought that I could do, not only personally with those people who I was working with, but also art has been something that, like, let's say someone like Banksy, art has been a critique of society for a long time, and it's considered almost like the peak of what art now does, is that it holds the mirror to society and says, this is what you're doing wrong. But it's in the Renaissance period of Italy, let's say, or those periods, or the kind of artistic expressions that I really appreciate. Let's say someone like Da Vinci, they weren't critiquing society only. They might have seen the problems, but they actually fell in love with the problems enough in order to want to solve them or present a way forward. And I think this is what art should be doing, especially now in this period of where we're in, and there's so much confusion about stuff, that those people who have a vision towards where we could be going, they should be giving at least a shot of trying to see if that could be a part of the direction of where we're going. So that's what I'm.
Let me repeat this, because I think this is incredibly important for society and not just our listeners here, which is that art has been a kind of a mirror and a lens to society, and a reaction and a reflection of society. And you used the example of Da Vinci, and if you combine that with some of your experiences, essentially you're saying art needs to be authoring the future. Um, I think that's a really important concept, because then you can bring narrative and drive the future in a constructive way. One of the reasons I'm fascinated by this is we did an event 2-3 years ago called Exo World, right? And the event was 3,000 people on. We kind of created the online conference premise 3 years ago when everybody was stuck in the pandemic, and the basic framing was, between Trump and the pandemic and everything that's going on in the world, we have two paths for humanity: either a Star Trek path or a Mad Max path, right? And we're clearly going down the Mad Max path. And how do you tilt that future? And I'm fascinated when you talk about art as a potential vehicle and the tip of the spear that can drive that. Do you see other artists looking at it from that perspective, or are you fairly unique in that sense?
I don't have too many people who I would say who are looking at this stuff, as far as I am aware of, through a very integral lens. I think there are people like, let's say, Refik Anadol, who's doing fantastic AI art and these massive data sculptures and infusing philosophy into it and other things. I greatly admire what he's doing. But I'm not really sure if I see many other artists who are specifically targeting that thing of future authoring. Maybe the visionary arts, let's say something like Android Jones or some others, but they come from a very psychedelic kind of mystical lens, as opposed to someone who would maybe collaborate with Nokia and their industrial metaverse. And kind of so that's I don't see many, but I might just be unaware of them. So
if we had a patron saint for our community, it would be Da Vinci, because he's stitching together multiple technologies to create profound new ideas. And I think when you talk about him from an artistic sense as authoring the future, and we look at it from an engineering sense or a technology sense, then you find a clear way of bridging those two realms, which are so important. So now, you start with a background of kind of trauma, NLP, integral theory, and you bridge that into art. You see yourself as a way of authoring art. How do you get into the headspace of actually creating a career and a business model and having art be the main modality about how you live your life? Because it's, for most people, it's like, oh, I need to earn money, let me go get a job. Whereas you found a way of making that your full-time thing. So I'm curious about that part.
Well, the first 10 years I was broke, and I have an autoimmune issue and many other things from the sustained stress and kind of many other things that come with the sort of stubbornness that I had to do it this way. But I think I'm completely unemployable at this point in time. I don't really have a plan B. I'm stubborn enough to think that I have created enough value in order to be able to be a part of conversations like this with you. And now finally, with the dawn of Web3 and NFTs and everything, it's become a sustained enough of a livelihood, and the way seems to be up and scaling to there not being much of a limit of what now can be done. And the first sacrifice of the first 10 years and then being early to this is really now starting to pay off in a way that is holistic also in the not only finances or relationships, but the whole of the ecosystem is coming together. And the perspective that I have, perhaps that might be useful, and this is a little bit of a gentle nudge and a critique towards the decentralized community, what I've been saying ever since the beginning of coming in. And so I came in 2017 to make art for and about the new money movement and why Bitcoin was important. What was the value argument? Because I came across the documentary Zeitgeist and many others in 2006 and came to understand the fractional banking system. And I watched a corporation documentary of how which was comparing if corporations are psychopaths, how many boxes do they tick and all that kind of stuff. And that led me on a specific kind of path to exploring these value arguments. And when Bitcoin came along and I really started understanding it in 2017, and I started listening to Andreas Antonopoulos and many other like profound guys who really could pin it down to what it was about, then I kind of got that, okay, so in the context of Da Vinci, you had the Medicis, and the Medicis did a monetary innovation, and they had the foresight and the courage themselves to put that to the use of funding the most profound arts, funding the scientific exploration, doing all of these kinds of things that, let's say now the Bitcoin community and the decentralized communities, they critique a lot of the institutions that we have, and they are almost feels like beyond repair at this point in many different ways. So fair enough, there's a lot to critique there, but the Bitcoin community is the decentralized Medici family. And the responsibility I think they haven't taken seriously enough yet is to actually fund the really profound arts and sciences and fixing up some of these systems and generating new ones in order for us to go to the decentralized future that we so dearly love. So this has been a part of the challenge, because a lot of the culture became about Lambos and then monkey pictures and then all of this kind of stuff. So what I would say is that we're now at a precipice where we are at the dawn of the new Renaissance, but it seems that people are dicking about with cartoons where, you know, we should be much more kind of going, so how is this used to maybe help fix the scientific peer review process? How can NFTs contribute to that? How can we take the best of the art that is showing us a way to go into the future well and fund that, as opposed to try and make the next 10,000 profile picture project that we can make a quick buck from? So that's the community that I'm trying to find. And thus far, I've identified that it's more working with brands or institutions, or like, you know, finding those people who are really doing the serious work, who would then kind of take it out of the realm of, let's say, more this crowd-funded, how can we survive in the aftermath of COVID type of navigation.
So I'm going to draw an interesting parallel. Let me go on a sideways path for a second. So I've done a lot coming from India and being exposed to lots of different religions, Buddhism and Hinduism and Christianity and Islam, etc., etc. I studied religion a great deal, and family background being very secular, and you have this kind of rise of chaos in the Islamic world, right? The fights between the Sunnis and the Shias, and then the tension between Islam and the rest of the world, etc. I started looking at that pretty deeply, and I came across an article. It was about 20 years ago. I can't find it, but I wish I could. But this is not my thinking. What this guy did was he went through all the major religions, and he showed that every major religion in history, 1,500 years after inception, had massive issues. Right? So the Spanish Inquisition, right, AD 1500, Judaism about BC 500, Buddhism about AD 1000, etc. Islam is exactly 1,500 years old today. It's like the teenage years of a religion. You have to have this explosion of hormones, etc., and everybody goes crazy, and then things settle down after that, right? When you talk about the evolution of Bitcoin and the NFT world and the junk stuff that's going on and all the crazy project, it seems to me like that it's the growing up of that community, right? And the question is, can you please grow up as quickly as possible and get through that the stupid phase, and let's get to the more serious work. And I think it's one of those things that we saw. So one of the things we did at Singularity University when we built it out 10, 15 years ago, and we saw all of this chaos in Silicon Valley and everybody trying to build better mobile ad networks and trying to do social networks and build apps. And we were going crazy with this, going, you've got unbelievable engineering talent focused on building a better photo app when there's 10 others already, right? Focus on more the bigger problems that we have. And so we set it up in a way to draw some of that talent into solving some of the big problems. And I think it's fascinating to hear what you're talking about, but essentially you're observing the same thing in the decentralized crypto world. Can we move away from the stupid stuff and move on to what the more important work of institution building, which is what we desperately need so badly today?
Definitely, that resonates. And a part of what you were saying about the immune system, I think the art world has let's say the more state-funded art world and the museum side and the academic side of the art world has been so invested in the art being the mirror of society and the critic of society for the past 4 decades, that I would say that in a certain sense, the last avant-garde artist that we had was Andy Warhol. I'm not a big fan of Andy Warhol's style, but he was definitely something that was taking on the powers that be. But ever since, almost the things that Andy Warhol was saying and taking on have become the establishment. And that, in a sense, now has an immune system to this future authoring and this future vision, because it doesn't know what to do in order to kind of get to the Da Vinci mode of generating and building with companies, building with different kinds of entities and institutions towards the future, because it's so accustomed to just being, here's what you're doing wrong. So I think that is a massive hurdle of how to get some of these very prestigious people who have invested careers and institutions to come on board with this kind of mentality that we have, is that this disruption is already here, whether we like it or not. And now we have to become a part of the solution. We can't just be here on the sidelines, sort of pointing and laughing. That's not going to be good enough anymore.
That's a great commentary. Can I give you my framing of this immune system and the change factor?
Sure.
So, when I have this, as I mentioned earlier, I have this hobby in metaphysics, right? And I did a lot of research on and writing for about 15 years on what is the nature of reality and what are the structures that drive things forward. And there were two framings that I think are relevant to this conversation. The first is that I came across what I think is the fundamental archetypal process for life of any kind, which is you have if you can picture lava flowing underwater, it's a good visual. You have this rock, and then the lava breaks through and it meets the red hot stone meets the water. It boils instantly. You get a lot of steam and hissing, and then it cools and it freezes again, and then it breaks through again, and you have this ongoing cyclical process, right, of a static environment. And I came to describe that as an archetypal process for life, where you have a stable equilibrium environment, some internal pressure breaks through, you have this very uncertain period of chaos, and then it freezes again, and then you break it open again. And there's different metaphors for this. I know Ken Wilber talks about some of this. Robert Pirsig, who wrote Zen and the Art of Motorcycle Maintenance, I think nailed it the most profoundly. He called it static quality versus dynamic quality. Two different types of good, in a sense, because there's security in the stability of something, and then there's goodness in the breaking through and creating a new reality, right? And both are good. You just have to manage that. But it's everywhere. For example, a snake grows its skin to a certain level and then basically sheds that skin so it can grow, so it can get bigger, right? And you can't have growth without consolidation. The stock market is a perfect epitome of this, where you have a growth pattern and then it stabilizes, and then people are looking for those resistance levels, both for growth and decay, and then it decays as well. So that's one metaphor, right? And framing. The second was a guy called Arthur Koestler in the 1950s, who was a British philosopher. And he looked at organizations and the tension that you have inside organizations, and came up with a fascinating framing that he called a holon. HOLON. So the idea being every piece of ourselves is its own thing, like your liver, it's its own thing, but it sits inside a broader whole. Right? The liver can't exist outside the body. And it's like a sales department inside a company, right? They'll fight to maintain their own identity as a sales department, and they have their boundaries and they have their rules inside that little piece of their world. But they can't exist without the broader organization. And Kessler defined these two forces as the self-assertive force, which is keeping your own identity as a cell or as a department or as a city, etc. And then the second part, which he called the integrative thing of the need to be part of a bigger picture. Right? And so crime families are really good at the self-assertive, not so great at the integrative, right? You're 10 years as a struggling artist. You're desperately trying to integrate and haven't built up the self-assertion to kind of maintain yourself properly. And I find if you take those two paradigms together, you can explain most things, because there's this undeniable quest for growth in life, at every biological life or financial life or spiritual life, of constant growth through this iterative growth and consolidation process. And then this horizontal tension of, are you part of a bigger picture, or how do you maintain yourself? Right. And the challenges of an immune system come from that, because you have some piece, say the Bedouin tribes in the Middle East where you're based, right? Their whole thing was their own identity, and their survival depended on maintaining the integrity of that tribe and defending it against all external forces, right? And then now trying to figure out, okay, how do you navigate that and be part of a new picture is the challenge. The difficulty in today's world is that the cycle time is going so fast that we barely have time to integrate before it's on to the next pattern. And this is what's freaking everybody out. When I do some of my talks, I mention the fact that in every religion, the orthodoxy is freaking out, right? You have Jewish settlers, you have Christian evangelicals, you have Muslim fanatics, you have Hindu nationalists, and they're all freaking out because they're trying to maintain control in a fast changing world. And here's a comment I would love to get from you. One of my biggest observations about humanity is people would much rather be comfortable than happy.
Yeah.
Right. And we're comfortable in like our old patterns. So we stay in those old patterns, regardless of the fact that we love these scarcity-based, market dynamic-driven things because we understand them. We have abundance over here, just like one nudge away, and we can't get to it.
Yeah, happiness is a strange term, because it's like, let's say some of the conservative arguments is that you put the seed into the ground now, and you have patience, and you wait for it to grow, and you reap the fruit later. And then some of the more animalistic nature of us is that we want something to give us instant gratification, and the juxtaposition in between the two of where is happiness, what is sustained sort of contentment, and does it come from, or how can we maintain some of the tradition that has developed over thousands of years, let's say some of what the religions have come to teach, and how they've corrupted themselves along the way, and how can they reach kids now that have been given this kind of a very hedonistic lifestyle goal, or you shouldn't have any restrictions, you shouldn't have any temperance, you should have it all now, basically. So how can we still maintain the role of parent, so to speak, as societies to the coming generations, whilst at the same time we have this kind of new line parenting where the parents are more like the friends to the kids as opposed to authority figures trying to make sure that they kind of go on the right track of life. So yeah. This is a little bit, maybe you can infuse from that what I'm trying to.
No, I get exactly what you're trying to say. I think when you have the beauty of any growth pattern. So I disagree with the whole philosophy of happiness and the quest for happiness part. The reason I disagree with it is I think it's the wrong word. I think in my studies, I think the ultimate quest, or the most fulfilling quest, is growth. I think people are happiest, right? People are happiest when they're growing, right? And a purpose gives you a direction to point your growth, right? You found art as that vehicle to drive yourself forward, and you're constantly experimenting and testing in that vector, but you've got your guardrails then set, right? You operate in this particular domain. Or you may say, I want to be a great chef, and then you operate in that domain, and you're constantly iterating, testing with this idea. I think when you have, what we've learned over the years from a metaphysics perspective is when you have periods of strong growth, you need very tight guidelines and bound, like the restrictions of the medium that you're working in are actually important for the creativity. And like if you want to write a great poem, you put structure in that poetry in the framing of the sentences, whether it's rhyming or whatever, and that guides the creativity. So when you're a teenager, you need very, very strong guardrails. And this is where the society or parenting or legal systems come in and go, wait a minute, let's constrain the activity a bit. If you leave it unfettered, then it basically doesn't get pointed anywhere constructive, and it dissipates. And so this is the difficulty I think society is having in a quest for saying, hey, let's be nice to the kids, right, and be collaborative parents, etc. I have an 11-year-old son. And when he's kind of acting up a bit and so on, I found fascinatingly that when I'm like a bit hard on him and go, listen, do this, or this is the consequence, he actually responds, and a little bit later he's like, oh, I really appreciate like that. And there was a couple of times when I said, listen, if you do that, I'm going to charge you $5 every time you swear. I'm charging you $5 that's coming out of your pocket money. And except I didn't have the guts to follow through. He picks up on this, keeps swearing, and I'm like, listen, I told you. He goes, yeah, but you don't even follow through with your threats. So what am I going to learn? And underneath that is like actually a desire for that structure. Right? He's like, give me the goddamn structure. I'll live within it, but give me the goddamn structure. And I think this is where the more creative societies lose themselves. You have to have very careful guidelines. It's like if you don't, it's in the US, for example, they're fighting against government and they're fighting against the rule of law, right? If you don't have the rule of law, you kind of lose society pretty quickly after that.
Yeah, definitely. Because, and especially as creatives, or more of the liberal tendency in my sort of constitution, it's like it's natural rebellion towards structure if it feels stifling, but it was a part of that identity that was broken actually by a friend of mine who's an NLP coach. I went to do a sports coach NLP training session in Spain, and that's where I learned from this guy, because I had this identity that I don't like structure, and my life was a little bit of a mess. And this guy challenged me over the period of 8 days to kind of realize that, first of all, I use structure all the time of how I create my art, and actually if I could infuse what the structure is that I'm using, I could teach it to others, and as well as change my identity in order to feel like structure is not something that is hostile towards me, but actually something that is an assistant. And that was a profound shift for me. And definitely that vision of knowing this is where I want to go, this is what I want to create with my art, because it's a sustained idea over a long period of time. When hurdles come my way, they're not something that is even too difficult to get over, even if they are very difficult, because my vision is somewhere else as opposed to in the problem. So I'm just then trying to see a way, do I have to go under, over, whichever way, or even just ignore it or somehow confront it, or whatever I need to do in order to get to where I'm actually going. That helps me keep on the right path towards growth and contribution. So it's a really good thing to have that kind of vision, because life is really, really damn difficult. So that's a great assistant to have in just that longer perspective on things.
I think that's a great point. The need for structure, and if you can embrace that structure and use it when you need it, then you can have a very constructive dialogue with how you interact with the world. Otherwise, it becomes very destructive very quickly. Right. I mean, it's amazing. I've been living in Florida the last few years, and it's incredible watching not just the U.S., not just Florida, but the U.S. in general, just grind itself apart on stupid perceptions that actually make no difference. I made this comment in the last election. The actual issues facing the country, none of them are being discussed at the election level. Right? And this is a huge challenge we have in democracy in general. When you look at the decentralization world, what gets you excited about the entire decentralized world and the potential of that? What gets you excited about, say, the crypto and Bitcoin world? Hey folks, Salim here. I am so excited about our latest launch, the Exponential Organizations 2.0 book. It's a living book This baby is a living, breathing, always up-to-date source of knowledge on the latest technologies and techniques for transforming organizations and building 10x growth and impact. How do we build a better future using the latest and greatest 21st century techniques? And the best part, you don't have to do anything. You just sign up for our basic tier, which is only $4 a month, and boom, you have instant access plus an AI chatbot interface into the book. You can cancel anytime, but there's more. We have a community of technologists, entrepreneurs, innovators, disruptors, thought leaders that we can exchange ideas with. You can tap into that ecosystem to build your dream. What is your massive transformative purpose? And the book plus the ecosystem in our community is set up for you to help leverage that and build it. So come along. It's a mind-boggling capability that we've built. Trust me on this and come and see us.
Don't forget to use the code EXOPASS to get 1 free month on openexo.com so you can read my new living book. That's EXOPASS.
Well, like in the context of one of the projects that I'm doing that I mentioned that I'm working with Brittany Kaiser, and this is because her life mission has become from a naive young leftist activist to going into a right-wing think tank of the Cambridge Analytica and then kind of struggling through that to become a data activist and an advocate for the Web3 communities. Like the transition from Web2 to Web3 of not giving your valuable data over to something, a behemoth like Facebook, as opposed to understanding that that information that you have has value and interacting with that in a different kind of way. Understanding that digital land ownership is all of a sudden a thing to be taken seriously. And why that is like maybe this example that 2.5 years ago, we were building my first ever metaverse gallery in CryptoVoxels. And it was a strange exercise because as my aesthetics is not, even though I started playing with Commodore 64 and the kind of blocky graphics and all that kind of stuff, it was never really my preference as a visually pleasing. So CryptoVoxels is this block land, this Lego land, and we're building this thing. And there's another great voxel artist called Ogar, this French guy who was building me. He's also a pyramid head like me. So we built the Giza pyramid proportions into this land that was given to me for custody and made it my personal gallery. And I thought that was an amazing thing because we could embed some documentaries and secret chambers and all that kind of geeky stuff in there. And then as before the launch of this pyramid gallery, I went to a metaverse concert held by some friends of mine who were DJs, and they were having this party. And at the time I heard that, there were these metaverse sneakers that were being sold for $200, $250, that were these Lego Blockland type things for avatars. And I thought it was the dumbest thing I'd ever heard in my life that someone would throw that amount of money into something like that. And then I go to this party, and there are some of my contemporaries there, like Coldy and Josie and some of the early crypto artists. And they have on their heads, it says like Coldy, and then he has a cool boombox and these fly-looking whatever things. And then I realized that I'm nude in my stickman thing, and it does say VESA on top of my head. And I swear I felt like I'd just gone into a real party, but I showed up nude. And I felt dumb. And that's when the penny dropped, and I went, oh, that's where the matrix really kind of kicks into gear, is that the human psychology is going from the physical world one-to-one to the metaverse world. And all of the things, whether your land ownership here in Dubai, your fancy cars, your fancy clothes, or your whatever way you kind of showcase your status or your taste or things like that, will be even more important likely in the virtual world because they scale there as opposed to what they do over here. And the opportunities that are coming from there, like one of the metaverse galleries that we're building with a company called Zoan, they have this metaverse called Cornerstone Land. It's this photorealistic thing. And I have a massive floating giant museum to myself that I can send across borders with all of the different kinds of things that I do, from 3D statues to art cars to the metaverse fashion to all the artworks and whatever. And I have this thing that would never be possible in the physical realm for me to hold 24/7 just for myself. And the scale at which that I can do this whole thing in, that if I play my cards right, I can have just an opening in this metaverse museum and charge everyone $1 for entry. And if I can attract 1 million people to come before I've sold a single artwork, I've made $1 million. So those kinds of things just blew my mind. And then doing this kind of celebrity thing now with Brittany Kaiser, because her numbers are pretty incredible as well. I think there's about 5 million articles written on her. on her own journey on this whole thing. And The Great Hack on Netflix has about 150 million views or whatever it is.
Yeah.
So she has this star power, but most importantly, what I'm attracted to is the substance and her mission. So to turn her life story and the data ownership into this virtual reality context art and utilizing AI to make it into different collections, then taking that on tour in the physical realm. So to go to New York, go to London, go to Riyadh, then hopefully also sell it through Christie's or Sotheby's or some of these kinds of things. And then utilizing these metaverse worlds that we're doing to do the co-launches so that there would be the high level art that we do and very expensive and auctions and all that kind of stuff. And then do also collections from that would be more affordable for people who would go like, well, I really like this. I want to support it, but I don't know this too well, but maybe I can throw in $100 and maybe it turns into 1,000. That those can also kind of come and participate in this whole thing. So, and in the societal context, anyone who really knows how the fractional banking sort of thing now works or doesn't work for the most part, and I see this inflation and the destruction of this system kind of come into culture in many different kinds of ways.
Yeah.
You know, the inflationary culture coming from it, so that we now have a counterpart to kind of keep checks and balances to the banking world and have the decentralized and centralized versions work as each other's immune system, hopefully, because there's certainly a lot of corruption going on in the crypto world as well. And what they're doing is not all, great either. So if they can have a conversation, and those who are really wanting to build the best of the both worlds and learn from one another, I think that's where we really get to something important. And this, as a final point of this tirade, where I see a part of the challenge, really, what I've taken on in the creative field of this, is that the art world doesn't really have much of a tradition of understanding the monetary system, or why these innovations came to be, what Bitcoin is and how NFTs and the value arguments of that. They don't really understand it. And then the web communities, they don't really have a background in art. They don't have a kind of an understanding what the value arguments are, why the art world has developed over thousands of years to come where it is now, and what the kind of sophistication level of different expressions are, or careers, or how to evaluate it. They don't have that. So both of these have blind spots, and neither like to admit that they have blind spots to this. So again, I'm not for everyone, but what I'm trying to say is that here's the best of the both worlds, and hopefully they can come together to be the spearhead again to showcase where to go.
Beautiful. I should give you a little history around because in the same vector around Brittany Kaiser, of how I got excited by Bitcoin. Okay. So 15 years ago, I was the head of innovation at Yahoo. And so I was floating around Silicon Valley. My job was to have Yahoo be the interface between the big tech company and the entire startup ecosystem. And there used to be an online conference, just a decentralized unconference around identity. It was called the Internet Identity Workshop. Happens every 6 months, and it's been happening for 20 years. So some of the protocols like OAuth and others were created then, so you could sign on to different places with your Google ID or your Yahoo ID. And so the guys who were running identity for Google, Cisco, eBay, etc., would all show up and discuss how are we going to manage identity across all these platforms, right? And so some of the OAuth protocols. And we used to there was this fundamental structural issue in the identity problem, which is in order to have an identity, somebody has to grant that identity. And so you had your eBay ID, or you had your Google ID, or your Yahoo ID, or your US passport. Well, if eBay got hacked, then you've compromised the whole identity system. And how do you solve the third-party authenticator getting hacked was the big challenge. And there was no way around that. It was a structural problem because somebody's granting the ID, and somebody has to grant you an ID that everybody is okay with before they'll accept you, right? So you've got this big structural issue. And I pointed that out going, well, this is a big structural issue. We can't solve for this in the current paradigm. Year and a half later, we're doing Singularity University, and our Brad Templeton, who was the head of computation, presents the Bitcoin paper in early 2010, and the penny dropped, and I was like, holy shit! If you have a decentralized architecture and you can do authentication in a decentralized way, that solves that identity problem. right? And that blew my mind. I was like, holy crap, this completely changes the world. And so I got excited by Bitcoin and crypto back then because I could see that it's going to solve this problem. Now, it turns out when you have a new breakthrough technology, it typically takes about 20 years to get into mainstream. We wish it was faster, but it just turns out it takes that long. Paul Sappho, one of the futurists at Stanford, used to say it took 19 years in his calculation of going from breakthrough idea to mass adoption of any kind, whether it's the TV or VCR or new technologies like the radio or mobile phone or whatever. And it looks like Bitcoin is following somewhat that a similar pattern. I love the way you frame it, that it's a counterbalance to the old centralized system and that both sides can learn from each other. I think that's a very mature way of looking at it, as opposed to everybody tearing down the other side, which is very easy to do, but not constructive at all.
I think a lot is lost in, we've deteriorated to the point of not having respect for the opposition, and actually really kind of wrestling with their ideas as opposed to demonizing them. And that's a really unfortunate thing, because we are on the same planet together. And this seems like a prelude to war. And in what I really wanted to ask you, and kind of your excitement in this kind of way, what would you see in terms of solutions from our decentralized point of view, or this kind of thing? What are you excited to work on that could be potentially helping to solve some of the divide that we now are embroiled in?
Yeah, let me give you one framing that I found fascinating, and I'll explain why I'm interested in that. So there's a guy called Harry Kloor, who was a writer for Star Trek, and he coined a term about 5 years ago called it technological socialism. Okay? Now, centralized government socialism fails because you end up with inefficiencies of the state trying to allocate resources, which is inefficient always, and it invariably leads to corruption. And you give favors out with your friends, and you end up in a mess. Over time, you either end up with huge inefficiency or huge corruption, or both over time, right? So in Canada or Northern Europe, the socialism it's pretend socialism in many ways, but it's somewhat inefficient at times. And what he noticed was, if you take Uber, Uber is actually a socialist application. It's the sharing of assets across a large group of people. But when an algorithm is allocating the resources hyper efficiently, you can get a hyper effective system with very light government oversight, but great outcomes. And now this is really interesting. Right? So you can deliver the promises of socialism without the centralization or the corruption. And I found that a fascinating framing. So you bridge from that to the general massive transition that we're going through. Mad Max to Star Trek is one kind of narrative framing. I think of it as the way Peter does in terms of scarcity to abundance. Right? And almost all the tension in the world comes from scarcity. Right? We're fighting over energy, we're fighting over oil, we're fighting over water, et cetera, et cetera. But the thing that is beautiful about technology, it solves for scarcity. Technology takes something that's scarce and it makes it abundant. And so you have this, we have developed, there's a talk I did that it might be interesting if you want to go check it out sometime. It's called Occupy Mail Street. It was written, I did the talk during the Arab Spring, and I made the comment that we run the world on a series of top-down architectures, pyramid style, the corporation, Judeo-Christian religions, the military-industrial complex, and they're really good for scarcity, right? If you're a corporation, you've got a marketplace, and you try and fight your competitors for maximum outcome in that scarcity-based environment. The military-industrial complex is all about scarcity, grabbing resources, et cetera, et cetera. Well, you're seeing the rise over the last 20, 30, 40 years of a whole set of decentralized architectures, like the maker movement, the DIY movement, the open source movement, now the crypto movement, Bitcoin, et cetera, is the epitome of that. And the decentralized architecture is really good for abundance. And one of my mentors, a woman called Nicole Dreiskeef, highlighted this. She said this is a tension between the male archetype and the female archetype. Right? So the male archetype is the top-down centralized architecture, command and control. You need something, you go form a unit, go attack that hill, and you capture that land and you grab it. The female and it's really good for scarcity. Okay, but the male archetype is really bad when it meets abundance. Because it relates to it as power and tries to hoard it. Middle East oil, Wall Street money, perfect examples. The female archetype, when it meets abundance, shares it around. That's the natural pattern of the female archetype. So when a big piece of a big elephant gets captured, or a big piece of meat comes into the village, the women share it around amongst all the families. Right? And so the female archetype is really good for managing abundance. And so we need this as we move the world to abundance. You do not want a male archetype running the world. You want a female archetype in a natural participatory environment dealing with this. For me, that's the fundamental tension that's going on in the world, is we're going from this male scarcity archetype to this female abundant archetype. And almost all the tension that I can see is that movement. Now, over the last couple of hundred years, almost all of our institutions have turned out to be centralized structures. Education, universities granting a degree, monetary systems being controlled by central banks, etc. And we need to move to more decentralized architectures to have more fairness. And so that's some of the tensions that I've been seeing.
Sure. Like I resonate with a lot of that. Although I heard this, and I don't know how this even relates, but I think it's something, the number of debt that women have taken on board through consumer goods is like 3 times more than men. I think that's part of why the advertisers really target women, because they have this more of a social network of mutual approval of things and distributing the resources, but they're also very good at spending it and not necessarily accumulating, and that might get me some accusations of misogyny or something like that, but that just happens to be the
I think that's a valid point, right? You need kind of a restraint and responsibility and guardrails on both sides, right? I think I would look at it as a pattern in that particular instance. I would look at it as a pattern of we've come into a world where, when I got married, my father said 2 things. He said, "I want you to digest these 2 things." And I'm like, "All right." He goes, "Now that you're married, you earn, she rules. That's the job in the world." And I was like, okay. So that goes to the spending part, right? Like I bring in the money and the wife spends it in a sense. And if you're not earning the money, then if you're just spending, there's no constraints. So you can't
spend. Afford a family, basically.
The second comment, which was a little tougher, was he said, "Now that you're married, I can tell you this. Now that you're married, sex is now a spectator sport." And I was like, "You're telling me this now? That's good. Thanks, Dad."
Well, but here's an interesting point, and something that I don't really know how to grapple with it properly yet. But one of the interesting things that I learned about the sort of modern dating game is that I think from the 18 to 30-year-olds in the West, for the large part during the last year, I think it was pretty insane, the numbers, something like 30-40% haven't had sex or are virgins. So essentially what I came to understand about the dating app game is that 5% of the guys get pretty much all the action, and then 95% in the apps get absolutely nothing. So the female standards are really high, and they're international now. So even if you were, let's say, a very hot girl in Helsinki or something like that, you're no longer competing for the dating pool of Helsinki, but you're also competing for Dubai and New York and other things, because if you're have notoriety on Instagram, it doesn't, some sheikh is going to slide into your DMs like immediately. So then some of the things is that females can easily have sex up, but doesn't necessarily correlate to them securing a relationship.
Yeah.
And that was part of the interesting thing is in this hypergamy kind of mating strategy of females is now become blown apart from the local context into something. And that led into a disturbing kind of thing, because in the Islamic world, you have traditionally, you can have many wives. And if the strategy has, from the female side, been often that they go for the top tier men, and then they don't actually mind sharing them if they're top tier enough. That the negotiation is here, that in the Islamic sense, that from the Western point of view, we can easily look at it as something misogynistic and patriarchal and dominating and something like that. But I would, here with the sheikhs and the kind of like the people who had wealth here, it was maybe a part of the female strategy as well, is that they went for the top tier guys. And that's why the multiple marriages, you can't have multiple wives unless if you were of means, and you could actually take care of that amount of responsibility. So in one way, the kind of liberation of the dating apps is philosophically not too far from Islam. And I thought, isn't that interesting?
Yeah. So this is great. So let me give you my perspective on what's happening with dating apps and social media in general. Right. So about 5-6 years ago, I did a debate on stage at a conference in front of 4,000 people with Randy Zuckerberg, Mark's sister. She was the head of marketing at Facebook. And the debate was, the crowd was voting on who wins the debate. It was a debate. And the debate was, are social networks good for society or not? Right? And she naturally took the pro side, and the organizer said, please, you've spent quite a lot of time building the underlying technologies to make social networks possible, but can you please take the con side and argue against it? And the argument I came up with is very simple. I said, what we've done with social networks is taken high school tribal dynamics of friending, unfriending, liking, groups, etc., and scaling it to internet level. So now you have an internet scale high school, right? With all the stupidity and dynamics that go along with the socializing, bullying, cliques that come along with high school, which is a bad societal structure anyway, of throwing large groups of kids of the same age into together. And then now we've scaled that to a global level. Really, now I won the debate. And then the organizer said, how many people will keep using their social networks? And everybody's pen went up anyway, right? When you take that to the dating apps, one of the conclusions we noticed with the dating apps is for throughout history, sex was scarce. And for the first time, with Tinder and other things, sex is now an abundance problem. And it's you can have as much as you want in a certain sense. Now that's bad.
No, but only the 5% of the guys, not for the 95%.
Well, if you play the game properly, now you're playing the game, right? Now it's causing some big issues in a couple of ways. First of all, I think it is the social media stuff is having people become so insular and not used to being around in groups. That's an enormous challenge, especially in the US, where people are naturally physically isolated anyway, with big distances between people. I think the second thing that I see is it's really bad for women, because women, the nature of love and sex for women is being the receptive, nurturing part of that relationship, and you don't get to exercise that in a single night dating stand, right? And this is, I think, some of the damage that's being done. Now, how you solve for that, I don't know. I think this requires, again, societal constraints. It feels to me like the banning of TikTok in the U.S. is an important thing, just because the kids are getting addicted. These apps are all designed to addict the user. And so why not just let them have drugs? I mean, it's the same brain activity that's being created there. So I think the society needs to come up with guardrails for some of these structures to naturally navigate this. If we can step outside our own structures, great, but we've not figured out a way of doing that so far. I think some of the work that you do in the art realm is really important for thinking about how do you integrate different experiences in different ways to bring about some of these things. So I think that's super important what you're doing.
Well, these are the really difficult conversations to have, but in one way, I feel like we're going sort of full circle back into either Christian ideas or otherwise religious ideas or those kinds of things. And for example, this whole thing of females being as promiscuous as the guys have been in the past, is that one of the real problems of that is that there seems to be this peer bonding hormone that females have, that is like after you've had more than 5 or 7 bodies or something like that hormone starts to loosen up. So your capacity as a female to peer bond with your future husband starts to go down. So the more
Interesting.
people that you sleep with, it actually makes you less and less capable of committing to someone. And that seems to be bringing a lot of unhappiness. And these are the kinds of things, I think, part of the nuance lost in the religious context and conversation is whether this patriarchal oppression was something to hold down or was it to protect. So there's somewhere in between, because again, like some people in the more of centralized banking community are going to say, we're protecting the customer, we're doing all of this kind of stuff. And if you sort of look under the hood a little bit, you go, is it really only that, type situation. So both of these are and I wish there could be a little bit more of this patient conversation is what do these wisdom traditions have to offer from their standpoint in the modern context, if we kind of go into the conversation openly as opposed to how it is often in the West now.
I think there's that. There's also, if we're building a new paradigm, right? What are the good parts of the old that you want to bring across? And let's build them in rather than having to struggle forever and evolve them individually and recreate the old. Recreate over time. Like, for example, when you take, say, in the banking system, you have this whole idea of custodial. Who holds your bank? Who holds your value? If the bank is the custodial, in the sense. And in Bitcoin, we don't have a custodial in a natural sense. You've got exchanges with their terrible custodians, as we've seen. Having it at the individual level opens yourself up for cyber attacks. And so now you'll evolve the trust structure of banks in a whole new way. And if you could recognize this is the good part of having a bank, you could have brought that structure over and avoid some of the chaos and machination in recreating the whole thing.
Oh, absolutely. And also just if I have my private keys in my ledger or whatever, do I store it in the home? Do I take a security deposit box? There's only trade-offs for the most part. And I think part of the mature part of the conversation, whatever we go into the field of, is that when we choose something, it's going to cost us something. And one thing that you were saying, that you have Mad Max or you have Star Trek, and my sort of coming of awareness of some concepts was as a 5-year-old was Star Wars. So I'm wondering where that navigates, because it's sort of in between the two worlds of Star Trek and Star Wars. The Trekkies seem to see that the Star Wars is a little childish and sort of immature, and it's not going that way. And then the Star Wars people are a little bit like, oh, so you don't believe that evil exists? And it's like it's two very different kinds of things. And I have love for both of them, but I think I'm more on the Carl Jungian kind of school of things, and I resonate still more with Star Wars because it had a spiritual foundation that is.
Yes.
Star Trek to me does feel a little materialistic, and I've come to try hedonism, materialism, all these different kinds of things, and come at crossroads with them that they didn't give me that purpose or sustained satisfaction. And I've come to feel of society that if we only try to solve the technological problems and the problems of abundance, if I look at what is going on in America, is that it had so much abundance that got corrupted and people still wouldn't find purpose through it.
So this is so great. Okay, so let's take this conversation towards that, start tilting it towards the more spiritual side and the force, if you like, from the Star Wars side. Okay, on what's happening to the U.S., I think this is a classic example in a couple of ways. You've seen the film Wall-E with the robot. Yeah. Right? And so when a society gets wealthy, they all got fat and they're living on spaceships, they can't move anymore, etc. We've seen this throughout history, because when at Singularity University, we studied what happens when we meet abundance, right? Like, how will we intersect? Because our entire history is based on scarcity. So there are instances where certain societies have met abundance. The Romans, when they took over the world, the Mughals, when they took over India, etc., etc. And when you study those societies and you have the Mughals conquering India, for example, or the Turkish Empire, we found that there were 4 things that people got involved in, and society ended up doing 4 primary activities in an abundance environment: food, art, music, and sex. Not in that order. by the way. And so they start self-expressing in a very powerful way, but their natural limitations were the scarcity world kept your physical body lean because you had to be able to go run around and hunt. In an abundance world, you get fat. And then you have to develop your own guardrails, right? This is where I think the guardrails become incredibly powerful. This is why I think the metaphysical structure of equal parts of growth and consolidation are necessary, because if you don't have enough constraints to guide that growth, then you end up in a mess. And this is the issue right now with the US, where there's no constraints on capitalism or money, etc. So you get all these perversions of people getting really bad calories, and now life expectancy is dropping like a rock in the US, right? The thing that I think, so when you look at that paradigm of growth and consolidation, well, then the higher level, the thing that's pulling you forward is the spiritual aspect, right? So the Star Trek aspect of the Force, I think, is a very powerful one, and a deeply important one, because that's the fundamental quest for the ultimate growth, as the ultimate self-expression, God, whatever you want to call it, is pulling us that way, right? I think it pulls all life that way, by the way, because you end up in this fractal environment of cycling through things in a very important way. Just a quick question. Have you done, well, let me make one point and then I want to ask you a question. When I compare Star Trek and Star Wars, right, and I'm kind of neutral, I'm like, I don't have a firm thing. The part about Star Trek that I found fascinating, because I ended up talking to the Roddenberry family that helped create it. The main principle behind Star Trek was called IDIC, infinite diversity, infinite creativity. And so they kind of, all the episodes and stories and narratives around that, exploring that infinite creativity of different species and characters dealing with things, etc. I think Star Wars is much more of a classic mythology hero's journey of embrace the Force and good versus bad, etc., etc. And then let's see where that goes. Very religious kind of undertones to the patterns there, with a secular God, if you like, in terms of the concept of the Force. Have you done psychedelics?
Yeah, that's.
Can I ask which ones? Are you happy to share that?
Yeah, sure. I mean, my journey with them is that ever since at first, the mild ones from weed when I was 13, I was kind of a bad boy, kind of rebelling, doing all that kind of stuff. I started drinking when I was 12 and smoking when I was 11. I was an idiot child, essentially. But, these profound experiences when I was 13 and smoking my first joint and listening to Pink Floyd, that was my sort of,
boom,
the top of my head blew off. And then, but it took a long time for me to have the courage to do magic mushrooms, because I kind of thought that I'm already a little bit out there. So these stories of people hopping off of buildings or going on sustained trips all of a sudden and not returning from them, they scared the hell out of me. But in 2010, I came at a pretty bad crossroads. I had a really profound health crisis. I got this slit disc on my back that led to my lungs eventually collapsing, and I ended up in intensive care and nearly died. And this was a moment when I kind of like was very deeply stuck in my head. My company was collapsing. I went into debt. I couldn't sustain myself, and I was thinking that I had all of this value, but it wasn't received at all in many different ways. And I had this really dark night of the soul, so to speak. And around that time, I came across the bard that is Terence McKenna. And I started listening to him, and I listened to maybe like 20 hours from him explaining that what a bad trip essentially is, that your ego has gone out of control, and essentially it's trying to hold on to this control. And what the mushrooms is doing is that it's dissolving it. And if you try and hold on to that control, it has no other option but to amp the volume, because your dumb monkey ass won't let the healing happen, so to speak. And once I started understanding that, so this is the process, and what it can really do is help me, that the thing that I think it's doing, which would be making me more crazy, is not the thing, that it's actually the antidote to the crazy that I'm already at. So I was like, okay, so that's interesting. And that gave me the courage to do it. And that whole process was just fascinating. And it just blew out the the fishbowl that was my kind of state of consciousness at the time. And I remember the following morning, without going into the details of what that meant and what I went through in it, a friend of mine came to visit me. And after a while of this person being in the same room with me, I realized that I had never been in my life as comfortable sharing space with another person than after that experience. That I got connected to something that I remembered that I got connected to when I had some really bad times as a young child, and then I connected to something beyond myself. And I all of a sudden got that connection back. And then after the mushrooms, I did ayahuasca, I did DMT. And that's a little bit of a conversation towards what you were saying and Elon Musk was saying about the kind of base reality and whether this is a simulation, and those relating to the Vedic texts and what that is that when I did DMT, I met the machine elves and kind of got essentially just transported to another world that feels as real as this, even if it, in a sense, even more real, because it took me beyond time and space and matter into something that I felt like connected to the essence of me that doesn't die after I pass on.
Yeah.
And this connection then, I can't shake it even if I want to. And it's such a power because I'm less afraid of death. I feel like the most base of my animal instincts I can tame better because I have some sort of an understanding of a deeper thing that I'm either connected to or not connected to. And now if I don't have that connection, I feel the pain. And I understand people who, if you don't have that connection, you try and soothe it with either alcohol or any kind of consumerism or any kind of thing to try and get that feeling. But it's really actually rather simple. And the game has become how little I need as opposed to how much I can get.
Yeah.
And that's been an interesting thing of how to let go of things. And psychedelics definitely connected me to that. And that path that has allowed me to take more seriously now to listen to YouTube lectures from monks and people like that who are more of the ascetic kind and how they infuse information and how they try to let go of things as opposed to accumulate things. But I wouldn't have been able to go into that realm in a intellectually sound or integral way if something hadn't blown apart my whole paradigm.
Yeah, this is the growth versus consolidation part, right? Where you have a particular worldview and something breaks that apart. And then there's this chaotic environment, and then you restabilize into a new reality. And so I'll give you my quick journey into this. Was about 10 years ago at Singularity University, there was a neuroscientist that came in and talked, and what he'd done was done real-time fMRI brain scans, so they can now track a single neuron firing in real time in one of these fMRI machines, and they then took people with different dosages and different substances and put them through that. So if you take before, in the 60s when they were first experimenting with drugs and so on, they really had no idea. They were just chucking it down, right? But as of 10 years ago, we now have a precise understanding of if you take this dosage of this psychedelic, it does that to that neural circuit. And so now you have a feedback loop. That's awesome. And so we now know that DMT suppresses the parietal lobe where your sense of self sits. And now you can explore your higher divinity in a way you couldn't do before. We experience it as an out-of-body experience, but that's essentially all that it's doing. So that's when I got interested in it. It wasn't until about 2018 that I found I met a woman called Sylvia Benito, who's done 10 years of galvanizing all the healers and shamans on this, that I felt I was ready for it. And then I've gone through a journey of taking a bunch of ayahuasca, then bufo, which is 5-MeO-DMT, and then MDMA. I've not done some of the others, magic mushrooms, seriously, etc., which Michael Janssen is a big fan of the hero dose, right? In fact, I asked Michael, who's a mutual friend of ours, who introduced us actually, what gave him this incredible presence, because he has this incredible way of just living right in the moment and making amazing decisions based on, he says, every year I do this thing called a hero dose, and it turns out that's when you do 5 grams of mushrooms. So it's like that factory reset on your nervous system, right? So you don't have any biases or preconditions or prejudgments about anything. You're just making decisions in the moment, in reality, unfettered by any other constraints. So you're going to make some great decisions when you're operating like that. But I think the profound nature of psychedelics, giving you access to that higher consciousness, and then having us be able to bring it back into the real world in a structured way, I think is incredibly powerful for the world today.
Oh, definitely. And I think Terence McKenna had a fascinating take that the last war of humanity is going to be fought in between meditators and psychedelic communities, because it's the pure or unpure. And I thought that that's an interesting thing, because I don't see.
Hey, hold on a second. Let me just rephrase. Let me just understand this. So Terence McKenna said the last war will be fought between the meditators and the psychedelics.
Yeah, more like this pure spiritual way of no mediator in between, or those who think that, that's not a price to pay, that you do it through a mediator.
Right.
And so one of the most profound trips that I did was through this rebirthing breathing technique. Actually, this was also back in 2010. And this felt like you just basically breathe really heavy for a while. And there's someone who takes you through that process, and there's music played and all that kind of stuff. And I just bolted into this very pure space. And I understood that it was a different experience that it was with the mushrooms. And if you think that there was this shaman guy who told me that if you look at the development of the world, that it's something like bacteria, and then it's mushrooms, then it's the plants, and then it's humanity and animals and all that kind of stuff. That the mushroom consciousness is kind of like the father, and then the ayahuasca is the female. So in one way, but it would have more of an agenda of Earth, rather than, like, if it's Mother Earth and Father Sky, in a way, in mythology, that, the mushroom would give you a perspective on something that is towards the earth and healing it and living in harmony with it. Whereas the Father Sky is, how do we transcend Maya, or what you would call maybe the programming, or the kind of like, is this base reality, or those kinds of things. And I think I made this one artwork, and this was a part of that I still think is one of the best things that I've done. It's called The Flower of Life, and I did it with this Bollywood actress, and it was such a premise, because her being Pakistani and Muslim, to appear in these nude body painting things, was, the press came to see if this was a car crash or not. Essentially, it was I trying to throw petrol at an already flaming fire. But I spent 2 years studying this kind of concept of what are patriarchal and what are matriarchal traditions. And this is from Ken Wilber, essentially, like the whole, that it's a snapshot from the moon to the earth, with both of these different traditions. And you could say that the ascending ones and descending ones, and the descending ones are the more patriarchal, as in emptiness, as in this is purgatory and you want to get out of here, and raise in frequency. And the ascending ones, the matriarchal ones, is more celebratory of sexuality and fertility, and the earth is paradise, and you're meant to, like, a soul has had to have done a lot of work in order to deserve a place here. So both of these are in harmony and in competition with one another, and that helped me understand the sense of why this is purgatory, because both of these polarities are here trying to compete for the powering of the other, because it's more beneficial to the constitution of the other than the other. So, but if they keep here in checks and balances, the shamanic symbol is this stick man with the sort of hands up in the sky and the feet to the earth. And we are something that is sitting in between it. And as souls, the idea is that we make the choice whether we want to more be in the ascending, whether we want to reincarnate here time and time again, or whether we kind of do some other stuff and we lower in frequency. That is also a possibility. And that would be the kind of traditional hell thing. And those are kind of, if you look at it in terms of, like, Nikola Tesla said something like frequency, vibration, and energy is the constitution. That if you start looking at what we choose for ourselves, is that if you do a choice, like you exercise, will your vibrancy go up? Is your frequency going to go up as opposed to down? And that gave me a perspective on the spiritual traditions and those kinds of ideas as well, and how to navigate them. Is it happy to be here in this frequency range that is the earth? Is it wanting to elevate, or does it even want to go down? Because I have friends who are worshiping Satan. So I talk to all kinds of people. I think that's the best thing about being an artist, that I can have a meeting like today with some investment bankers, or that I can just navigate these worlds. And this is the real gift that I think I got from Ken Wilber, is to go always into the table assuming that that other person has something to teach me.
Huge.
And
I've got 100 questions coming out of this. Let me respond to a couple of quick things that you said. I've been fascinated by the metaphysical idea of levels, right? Whether it's soul, subconscious, conscious, and then divine. And one of the thoughts I have, one of the constant inquiries in my mind is, what level of conscious are you making a choice at? When you're deciding to act or not act, what level of consciousness is that? For example, when you get married, ideally that's a spiritual choice. I mean, the chakras of the body are one good way of looking at this. Do you ever see this from this perspective of trying to navigate these different levels?
There's a project that I did with this augmented reality platform called Superworld. And essentially, I came across the work of John Anthony West, who's this kind of rogue Egyptologist some time ago. He produced a documentary called The Mystery of the Sphinx, which was narrated by Charlton Heston, and he won the Emmy for it. And that led me down a path of one of the episodes in his television series called Magical Egypt was about the Luxor Temple. And the Luxor Temple, when you look at it from from the air, it's built into the shape of man. And essentially, when he dwelled into it, is that from the feet to the head and the cavities that are inside of the temple, is that the whole thing has the chakra points, and essentially it takes you from the birth story of a pharaoh to transcendence, and how the soul goes then through the Milky Way, and it actually frames the Milky Way in its it's an incredible structure that is holding together society from the leader to around it, of how to live life well. And I thought, hold on a minute, we haven't, even if you have, and this is one of the profound, by the way, sort of failures of, let's say, the church in the West, is that they used to build these magnificent cathedrals, these amazing places of transcendence and inspiration and awe, and fund the arts. When have they since done that? You know, and they wonder why they're decaying at the rate that they are, and why they're failing. And by the way, as a free gift to anyone, why doesn't the church now go into the metaverse? Why don't they build these spaces of awe in the digital and decentralized kind of way, and kind of bring some of the wisdom that they have maybe into the conversation this way? I think this would be a good way to go about it. I digress. Sorry. So anyway, we built this thing in the virtual, the Luxor Temple in the virtual world, and then we made it my personal art gallery in order to honor the actual substance of what was really great about the past, to showcase people now what is possible to do right now, and where that's going to lead in terms of ideas. So the past, present, and future together as an experience that can scale and be sent across any borders. And I thought that was just some beautiful thing. I would love to see more buildings being built, because right now we have this, let's say, earth-centric, let's save the earth, the environment, all that kind of stuff, but we don't have this more of a vision of structures being how to live well beyond just saving the earth. And that temple from the past is something that is a magnificent example of that takes the concept even further. What? And I just realized we haven't built anything like that anywhere for a long time.
The closest I can think of is Gaudi's Cathedral in Barcelona.
Yeah.
Which has, do you know the quick story there? So he designed this cathedral 100 years ago, and he designed it, as he designed it, he basically said to people, this can't be built using today's technology. So he designed it saying, we're going to need breakthroughs in all these different areas, and I expect this is going to take 100 years. And so people were like, that's nuts. And it's now finally getting finished. And so what's also fascinating about it, it's completely crowdfunded. They wrote into the articles of the incorporation that only donations given by visitors can be used to build a cathedral, because any donations by major donors will corrupt the structure, right? And so only funds coming from visitors over time. So they They know what they want it to look like when it's finished. As they collect enough money, then they spend it on this piece, and they collect more money and they spend it on this piece. It's a staggering, beautiful thing, but it's maybe one of the few examples. And you're absolutely correct. We should have hundreds of those examples. Just a quick question. You said John Anthony West. What was the documentary?
It's called Magical Egypt, was the series. I think the first episode is remastered and it's on YouTube. It has a second season. I haven't seen that yet,
Okay.
but that doesn't have John anymore because he sadly passed away from cancer. And one of the great privileges of my life is that I got to interview him. We became friends, and I even body painted his daughter because they came to Finland and visited my studio, and he named the pieces. And Zoe was a model for some of these Egypt themed pieces, and it's still one of the great joys that I got to be a part of his life in this kind of way. And Mystery of the Sphinx is the one where he went with Robert Schoch, I think is his name. He's a Harvard water scientist, because the model of how old the structures in Egypt are is what they've been arguing for a long time from the rogue side, that they're much older than we give them credit for. And through this water erosion scientist, that they kind of estimate now in this documentary that it might be something like 24,000 years old. Or if you go to the mystical side of talking to some of the more shamanic people in Egypt, that they say the Sphinx has no age. So they go in this kind of way. But yeah, but apparently the gist of it is that it used to maybe have a lion's head, and it points to the constellation of Leo, and what Plato called the great year, this 26,000 elliptical cycle that is then in the Mayan calendar, or it's in the Vedic kind of traditions of our understanding of the journey of the Earth, is that it was a star pointer, and those kinds of things. And that's through this water erosion that it's not possible that the timing that we've given to the Sphinx is correct. But because there's so much invested academia and egos and books and careers who want to hold to the timeline, they won't even consider Göbekli Tepe in Turkey, which can be carbon dated to 12,000 years old, which blows apart all the different kinds of things. So it's a real culture war, not only in terms of the left and right and those kinds of things, but also about our past and these cataclysmic events that have maybe happened, and those are the deep rabbit holes that I love.
Well, I don't know if you know the history of the Catholic Church in the Council of Nicaea. Do you know about this?
Not very well, please.
So in the original various books of the Catholic Church, we just have the four: John, Luke, Mark, and whatever. But there used to be 20 of them, and it turns out that Jesus was preaching a lot of the thinking around reincarnation and so on, but that loses power for the patriarchy, and so in AD 562 or something, there was the Council of Nicaea, where they actually voted, the Catholic Church got together and voted to strip all mentions of this out of the Bible and edited it down to the four Gospels that we now consider this. And I find that totally fascinating. It's fully documented in this history. The thing that the penny dropped for me in this discussion, when my dad gave me a book about a decade ago called The Pagan Christ. Okay. And what this fellow did was went back and looked at the story of Christ and basically said, look, this is not a new story. It's been going on for a long time. In fact, what he was able to document was that the story of Christ is the actual retelling of the Egyptian mythology around the god Horus. So Horus was a baby born in a manger with a carpenter father and a virgin mother, 3 wise men, 12 disciples, death, resurrection. Like, it's the whole thing. It's everything. The whole of the Christ stories in this story of Horus. What the Christians did that was very clever marketing was they pretended it was historically accurate and real. And so the Christ figure, or Jesus Christ, was basically painted in this image of a real person doing these things, as opposed to a mythological story. So they retell the whole story just in terms of this actually happened and this was a virgin mother, etc. I did a set of discussions with the Vatican a few years ago because they called up and said, look, the Pope has the worst immune system in the world. Can we talk to you? And so I did a couple of workshops there. And I ended up talking to the historian, the guy who ran the Vatican archives, and I asked him a question around the virgin birth issue. I don't know if you know this, but there's a translation problem. Do you know about this? So it turns out when they translated the Bible from Hebrew into Aramaic, they made a translation mistake. So when you read the Bible in Hebrew, original Old Testament, there's no concept of virgin. It's called the young maiden Mary. Right. When they translated into Aramaic, they had no word for young maiden, so they used the word virgin. Right? And if you talk to any biblical scholar, they'll go, yeah, it's translation error. So I asked the historian at the Vatican, look, virgin birth, this seems to be, he's like, yeah, it's a translation error from the one to the other. I said, yeah, but the whole Catholic Church is premised on the Virgin Mary. He's like, yeah, once that meme is injected, you can't get it out. Like, how would you get rid of it? Yeah. How would you fix it? Right. And I was just like, wow, like these guys, the entire thing is an artificial premise that's been edited over the thousands and hundreds of years, with the roots in an Egyptian myth, which I find utterly fascinating.
Oh, sure. And to add to that, because this goes into the John Anthony West territory and the Zeitgeist film, I think that was a part of it, that it said that, from the Nordic point of view, that when the sun dies on the cross, as in goes into the cross of the equinox on the winter solstice, that it sits there for 3 days on the cross until resurrected and starts to move again, and the constellation of Virgo is a part of it, and the 3 stars, the 3 wise men, that they're all references to star kind of constellations and how that correlates with our mythology and our archetypes and those kinds of things. That it's not necessarily, in my view, anymore that it's one thing trying to lie over another. Of course, there's control issues, but it's just that it's very complicated to and needs a lot of sophistication in order for us to go, okay, so these stars have something and our archetypes have something, and then we as human bodies, we have something, and we can embody these principles.
This I think goes into the full Joseph Campbell, the recurrence of, he used to call myths as society's dreams, right? By the way, the last part of that Pagan Christ book is he was able to show that the story of Horus is not just instantiated as the story of Christ. It's happened 26 other times. Yeah. Krishna, Moses, all babies found in the reeds, etc. So you have this classic, and then Joseph Campbell basically said, well, that's the hero's journey. You have this kind of infant figure found somewhere, and then you have to go through and find truth. And you go through the struggle and you find truth, right? And once you find truth, then you can be fully self-expressed as a human being and connect with the higher divinity.
Because I just heard that the same is true of zebras, that apparently that when you have a very old zebra, a male, once they start to lose their fertility and their control, they can't make more zebras anymore. But what they start to do is kill off young buck zebras, because they know that their demise is coming, so they just start to go haywire and kill the young ones because they want to maintain that power and control. So it's sort of ingrained into our genes, and the whole of the structure of this thing is this sort of divine inspiration and then corruption and then the power play in between them.
It's the kid's story, right? King of the hill. You get to the top of a little hill and then you beat off everybody else until somebody finally knocks you over.
What a lame premise.
It's a terrible, it's part of the idea that evolution is an incredibly inefficient process, right? Millions of species fighting it out, millions of specimens of a species fighting it out in this unerring thing. My 11-year-old son right now is fascinated by African documentaries of, families of lions hacking it out on the savannah. And he was like, so they miss one meal in 3 days and then they're dead. Like you have to catch something and kill it every 3 days, otherwise you die. And it just the reality of the brutality of life is incredible at one level, and the profundity of it at another is incredible, right? And I think this is the role that you play so powerfully and importantly as artists, is you navigate from that brutish short existence that we have to the profound infinite in an incredibly elegant way.
But also something where we need to be kept in check, because I think there's easily a messiah complex that comes with that, is that you're meant to have this vision and you're meant to do all of these great things. But then, like, if I'm honest with myself and sometimes look in the mirror, I'm a complete idiot and an ass. And sometimes I get it fully wrong. And at this point in time, now that I've been blessed and searched for so many different kinds of teachers and these kinds of things that I can infuse them into things, but still remain that the only way path forward is that, okay, I can step 1 foot forward, but remain humble. Because if I don't remember that and I try and overstep at all, then life will humble me. And one part of this that I kind of think is very interesting is what's going on in society and in relation to these wisdom traditions and what we're doing as a species in one way. And I remember this, what you were saying is that we have to interrupt our brains because they're not evolving fast enough, is that there's a certain thing that where I see as societies we are, and our human power is that we get to engineer a lot, but a part of the modern conversation is that it's only human centric and it's this oppressor or oppressed narrative, as opposed to that there is a cosmos and there's laws and dynamics beyond us of how they work, and it's whether we're engineers or whether we're discoverers. And I think to one part of the modern civilization and our developed societies have forgotten a little bit is the spirit of discovery as opposed to engineering. And there's a certain amount of humility that is lost in that I would hope is counterbalanced with one another a little bit more. And these kinds of things going into the like let's say the mysteries of Egypt and the Luxor temple and those kinds of things. What did we know before, and what has actually in our name of progress been deteriorated into something that we think is progress that actually isn't, is a part of the conversation.
You know, the destruction, I remember talking to some of the Richard Dawkins, for example, and we had this unbelievable Library of Alexandria that got destroyed by the Muslims in about 81,000, and they predict, their estimate is that we've lost about 5,000 years of deep understanding of many, many things because of all the documents that got ruined and destroyed at that. It's like there's this curse of reinvention and rediscovery, which is, you can look at it as a curse because, but on the other hand, isn't it great to rediscover these things and find them anew? And you can look at it both ways. And I'm curious how you look at it, because we have this, it would be great if the younger generation learned lessons faster, better, but then that journey of discovery is how you kind of evolve into spiritual fulfillment in the first place.
Well, I'm going to butcher this now, but it's like even the Christian, the Holy Trinity idea is that material, and so time, space, and material is the kind of thing that we're stuck in as most of our consciousness, and what the concept of God is meant to be beyond it. And most of the arguments that I hear from, let's say, the atheist community or the more secular ones, they tend to always base their arguments still around the paradigm of those three, and that's why the beyond it doesn't make sense.
Yeah.
And what I got connected to, either with through the psychedelics or meditation or things like that, is that mostly fleeting moment when I get to be in that completely disassociated space from all those three factors. And I think that's what they're trying to say, that there is this realm beyond these sort of paradigms of time, space, and material. And that's a incredibly difficult thing to talk about, because if you haven't had that experience, it just sounds like, okay, so here's another con man.
Yeah.
And that's
I think this is where I think psychedelics are so powerful, is that we now have you could do this through breathing work, and there's lots of tantra, for example, or whirling dervishes from Turkey have a prescriptive path towards a religious ecstatic moment, right? And we've had that for a long time, but to do that work and go through all of that effort to have that moment is non-trivial. Whereas today, that if you take X dose of mushrooms, you will have that experience. And we can now have people kind of get a glimpse of that and then come back and reformat their view of the world based on that, right? It's fast. It's very clear to me that if we had all the world leaders take ayahuasca, we would just not have wars again, right? Because you lift up a level and you go, okay, there's like several other dimensions. What the hell are we fighting about here? And you see the pettiness by which we run many of our daily activities.
So I'm super curious. Where do you now, with your perspective on technology and you growing up in all of these different cultures, and where do you find with your own kind of immaterial, or the, let's say, because it's such a, I hate the word spiritual. All of these words have been corrupted to the point of like being difficult to describe. But where do you sort of feel yourself to be in that space?
So I'll just channel Ray Kurzweil for a second. When he was at one of the sessions we had with him, he was asked about consciousness, and he goes, language is a really thin pipe to discuss a topic as rich as that. Right?
Yeah.
I thought that was an incredibly, one of the more profound things I've heard him say.
Describe your trip. Oh boy.
That's like words. Yeah. So I come at this from the following. When I was young, my father took me aside and said, listen, here are the 10 commandments. We have Islam, we have Hinduism, we have Christianity. Don't follow any particular religion, just follow a moral code. If you get into a specific religion, you're going to paint yourself into a corner, and you don't want to get into that. So that was the tradition that I was brought up in. Very engineering, Western thinking in many ways. I come from a diplomatic family and so on. It was in third year of university. My degree's in theoretical physics. And in third year of university, they start giving you classes in quantum mechanics. And I happened to be taking an elective course on Eastern religions. And the course in quantum mechanics and the course in Eastern religions had required reading that was the same book. I was like, wait, how is it that, and today, if you're doing an advanced degree in particle physics, nuclear physics, quantum mechanics, you have to take courses in Buddhism to get your head around the transitory nature of quantum phenomena. And that I found totally fascinating. And when I've kind of covered the gamut of Christianity and Judaism and whatever, basically my basic view is that the core tenets of Buddhism are the most archetypal, most fundamental truth, and everything else is a narrative layered on top of that to give it a prescriptive form. And so for me, that's one path of it. I've done a couple of sessions of 10-day Buddhist meditation called Vipassana. And I've done a ton of yoga and psychedelics. I've gone through the gamut of NLP as well, by the way, Tony Robbins and landmark education, etc. Dealing with my own traumas when I was young. So having experience, I've lived in 8 countries for more than a year each. So I'm quite confused at one level, but it allows you to connect the dots at a very profound level, right? This is where the experience at Singularity was really fascinating, because I could see the connection between biotech and crypto and autonomous cars and drones and where things are going to break out. And it gives you kind of a broader sense of things where you can live the journey in an interesting way. And I think now it brought me to this perspective that we now have this incredibly important time, and how we navigate this next few decades will drive the next several hundred years of humanity. And this is now the work of leaders. If I had to kind of summarize it all, if E.O. Wilson, the famous biologist, right, said that we have Paleolithic emotions, medieval institutions, and godlike technology. And all of the tension in the world comes from the difference between those 3 layers. And if you're a leader in the world today, your job has to be to reconcile those 3 levels, because otherwise we end up in a hell of a mess. So I think that's the work that we have to do. And I'm fascinated by your work, because art is a profound way of integrating different paradigms and force fitting them and connecting them via narrative or via the experience of art. And so I'm utterly fascinated by how you do your craft. Let me ask you a question. How do you come up with a new idea or next piece? Does it appear in a flash, or do you take notes? What's the process for creation for you?
anything and throw the kitchen sink at it. But mostly, I think what I got from Ken Wilber as a perspective was this whole thing of integral thinking. And the religious context of the art world is that if you now go into the legacy kind of art realm, you go into an institution and they teach you about what has been done before and the footnotes of it, and increasingly so to a very narrow path. So you won't get the ancient Egypt, you won't get the history of how body painting and cave painting are likely the oldest forms of art and how the churches adopted it, or mosques and the transcendental to whatever. It's mostly like this very narrow path and the footnotes of those who generated the last 40, 50, 60 years of art. That's what you get as an education. So that's why most of the institutionally protected art realms have become footnotes on footnotes and not very innovative because they didn't go outside of their own bubbles. And what I got from Ken Wilber to begin with is that why don't I have a conversation with Nokia now that they're relaunching their industrial metaverse and see if there's an artistic contribution that I can do to that in order to go outside of the bubble of art and make it actually relevant to society. So where I get my inspiration from is this conversation right here. I'm not trying to infuse something that Picasso did, even though of course it's in the back of my mind. It's probably visually one of the people that I admire the most is still Dali. God damn, that guy was just amazing. And I know he gets sneered at because he did some chocolate advertising and was kind of a kooky character. He was brilliant at marketing for his time, but actually the substance of his work and the mastery behind it is still profound, like in terms of expressions. So in some sense, I'm still drawing inspiration, I think, from that guy or what he did. But ultimately is I went to Ken Wilber and I thought, how can I transform these ideas that are in text or audio form? How can I make a visual representation of those ideas into something that is a visual art thing? And when NFTs came along, I realized that I could utilize my film background, my storytelling background, or the Joseph Campbell's hero's journey and help people go through those heroes' journeys in the body painting thing and make that into an expression. And maybe those can be animated. Maybe now all of a sudden we can have 8 GoPro cameras on Brittany Kaiser to let her heroine's journey become something that is this cutting edge art. And we take that on a global tour that becomes not only art, but an education about your Web3 presence and why it's important to own your data. So I've been given this gamut of tools, but I try not to look at what the art world is doing very much because for the most part, and it pains me to say it, it's not doing very many interesting things. And now it's coming to the Web3 community and it's trying to infuse the value mostly through, okay, so these guys are doing a bunch of money. We don't understand it. It seems a little silly, but they're making money. So why don't we also throw crypto dick butts into Sotheby's auction?
Right.
Because, why the hell not? Because we're just a long-standing quality institution that is now happy to sell McDonald's burgers all of a sudden. So it's a little snappy, but come on.
I think I agree with you in many ways, and there's so much work to be done, right? And so many jumps to be made that dealing with JPEG images is kind of unfortunately immature in many cases. However, I will tell you this, when Michael Janssen dragged me into the crypto NFT world and I was hanging out in some of these Discord channels, what I witnessed was the speed at which some of these theories are being evolved was unbelievable. The different gamification techniques, etc., etc. And I was blown away by a couple of things. One was that it's the first time I've seen a community that truly operates in abundant. They relate to money as abundant. They don't relate to money as scarce. They're like, oh, we need some money. Let's go sell some NFTs and we'll come back and keep doing what we're trying to do, right? The healthier ones as opposed to the scammer types of which there are plenty. The second thing that blew my mind was you never ever heard the word US dollar or euro. You only ever heard Ethereum. And I thought, wow, this is incredible. Like they don't give a damn about the exchange rate. It's just, is this 1 ETH or half an ETH or 0.2 ETH? And that's it. The entire conversation around the medium of exchange has changed completely. And that's a huge shift from 10 years ago, right? And I don't know how the banking world and the traditional banking world will deal with this. They can't cope. I love the way you frame it as you've got a healthy alternative now between Bitcoin and the fiat world, and they'll have to figure it out. which is a very healthy way of looking at it as opposed to the one way, the other way.
Yeah, I think you're just absolutely right about the whole 19-year or 20-year cycle, and we're now at what, 12, 13 years?
Yeah.
Something. So we're coming to maturity. I see a lot of evolution in that side. With regards to the NFTs thus far, and there's the niche community of the art world, and I understand it. It's very difficult to evaluate the career and the output of an artist in a one-of-one, and they're not as liquid and they're not as exciting as building that community, because the whole Web3 thing is about community. But there needs to be an avenue, and this is the thing, what I thought about the whole Medici family, and there needs to be some people who are more centralized, who see the vision, who support the more serious exploration side of the art, that it can evolve faster. Because I think this renaissance, essentially what we're describing here, that is so necessary, and we're by no means guaranteed that we're not going to fumble the ball.
Yeah.
So we're at this birth phase of whether we're becoming an interstellar species, and it's not going to be under the calm experience of how we're going to do that. It's not going to be a given that we get to do this renaissance. So in one way, I should stay away from critiquing the JPEG communities and most of that stuff, because it's not really my gig. And I'm sort of very happy also that many people who would have become very boring office cubicle jobs or something like that, they get to now be decentralized degens and do an NFT collection and up their creative game and a different kind of reality. So from the bottom up, the creativity side of humanity with AI is definitely lifting.
Yeah.
But it's still the low resolution version as opposed to the high resolution one. And I would just love to see a little bit more support towards the high resolution one. So maybe I just need to temper my kind of output on this, but that's the beacon that I'm trying to put up there.
Well, I think this is where it's so important to have conversations like this, where we can say, all right, instead of doing this, let's point people towards the big challenges, right? And so, because we have the opportunity today for a single individual to make global transformation occur, and we've never had that before in human history. You needed the blessing of the church or the blessing of a big company to do something, and you take Vitalik with several co-founders, boom, they go create Ethereum, ignored the professor's warnings, and boom, we have a complete paradigm change in the world. And I love talking to bankers about this, because they just cannot conceive of the fact that this one kid and a few friends created a $300 billion ecosystem out of nothing. Right? They just can't, with no permission, no granting, they just went and did it, and everybody's like, what the? And they can't conceive of it. It just literally can't conceive of it. The other example I use a lot is this 3D printed car out of Sri Lanka called a Vega. Have you ever seen this thing?
No.
It's an electric car, 900 horsepower. Looks like a Lamborghini. It's utterly stunning. It's the third fastest car in the world, I think. It's designed, built, engineered in Sri Lanka. That hotbed of automotive engineering, right? And I make the point that, like, I love showing it to German car execs. Like, I go, look, this thing, a bunch of fishermen and farmers just came up with this, and their brains break. They can't cope. They can't process like what just happened, and they typically shut down. And I think this is the opportunity where art plays such an important role. Is you present people with a proposition and try and keep people's brains open while they confront that new reality and have them absorb it and integrate it into that new world, as opposed to going, no, that's the other, right? And I find it amazing the way you're able to do that, because you're in a traditionally very conservative place, and you're producing art that is bringing all of these different worlds together in a very profound way. And I think it's amazing. It's an amazing example of what's possible in the world.
Well, one of the things that I found support here, and one of the main projects of why I moved to Dubai to begin with, is that I was kindly introduced to this guy called Dr. Marwan Al-Zaruni. And he was at the time the CEO of the Dubai Blockchain Center. Now I think he's a more supportive role there, but he's the strategic advisor to Digital Dubai. Brilliant guy, and likely one of the most famous faces here for blockchain and a real pioneer at it. And when we first met, I was introduced to him before even my first trip to Dubai by this crypto granny, Anita Kalergis. She's a real grandmother and an advocate for cryptocurrency since 2017. She's kind of sat down all the Asperger kids and said, make it make sense so I can help sell it type situation. She's incredible. So we had many conversations when I first came here. And as part of just of the many conversations, I showed him this concept of an art car that I did back in 2014. That was a Tesla that was infused with my art. And I didn't think anything of it. And because at that time, the education that I got from Elon Musk's Tesla project is that, hold on a minute, okay, so this is a car, but what it's actually is a transformation of the world's electricity grid and an evolution and a different value argument. So after a couple of months of going back home to Finland at that time, then I got a call from Dr. Marwan. He said, hey, listen, I've bought 17 cars and we're going to be making them into NFTs. And you can't do it here now in Dubai because of the RTA won't allow you to do full-blown art cars. But don't worry, we'll figure out the process. And we started this 1.5 year long process where we pushed it little by little that I now drive one of his cars that has one of my digital artworks wrapped around the car. I painted on top of it. Then it has a digital 3D model, and we're developing a game where those who buy the whole full stack of assets from us get to race each other in the metaverse. So this is one of the things that I was telling these bankers today that I met, that they're forming a private bank, making it even more private. And I said that this might be interesting for you because part of this is education and part of this is the value argument. So most cars are a liability.
Yeah.
So what we're saying is that I'm not selling you a wrap. I'm selling you a cutting edge digital artwork. And through our process, you get to implement that both on your wall, as well as we're selling part of the IP that you get to put it on your car. And in the NFT, it says that, if you now buy the next one, it will be number 4 NFT street legal art car here in Dubai. And if you know this place, it's like mostly the flexing is done with your license plate because even Rolls Royces and all that kind of thing is very common. And if I now drive next to a Rolls Royce, all the eyes are on me, like Tupac style, so this is an evolution that is happening. And once people look at the car, first they think that the car is of value, then they start to question whether the artwork is more valuable, whether the actual licensing is even more valuable than the artwork. So what is this 3D asset, and is it a game like thing, like I lifted it off Bored Apes? Essentially it's a club that you only get to access, and then once you get access to the metaverse and the ecosystem that we're building around it, how valuable is that? So I built as much utility as I possibly could as a value argument towards NFTs that is also an education that takes you from a pretty boring car to the metaverse.
This is where I think the magic will happen, right? Is when we are able to intersect the real world with the conceptual world in the way that you've just described. And then you can have transformation happen in a really powerful way, because you can bring new paradigms into being and give people that experiential nature. This is one of the hardest things we've had over the last, say, decade, is every time we do a course or a lecture, trying to get people to go from a linear view of the world to an exponential view of the world is incredibly difficult. And here's a challenge I would give to you. Okay? So if I could have you think about something. I take 30 linear steps and I go 30 meters, I get to the bottom of my garden, and we can predict really well where's a third of the way or 2/3 of the way in that progression. We're really good at linear extrapolation. All our education, training, intuition about the world is of that format. You take 30 doubling steps, 2, 4, 8, 16. At step 30, I've gone 1 billion meters. I'm 26 times around the world, right? Which is a bit further than my garden. Very hard in that context to gauge where is a third of the way and 2/3 of the way in that discussion. Something we've struggled with massively, and I don't know anybody who's really cracked it, is an easy, elegant way of getting somebody's head from that linear 30-meter journey to the billion-meter 30 doubling journey. And so it would be great to have you think about that. How would you bring somebody along that journey, or get that across in a concise way? We've struggled with logical arguments, etc. I think art has a shot at it because you're able to kind of bridge, have that spark jump between paradigms, right? That you might be able to do it. So that would be something I'd love to chat with you on another podcast episode. By the way, we're running out of time because
Sure.
I have a hard stop in 10 minutes and this has gone like way further. Could I invite you back again? We'll do this because I've got 20 more questions that we never got to.
Oh, dope. I would love to. I'd be honored to. This has been so much fun. Can I take a quick stab at what you just said?
Please go for it. How do you think about doubling patterns?
Well, the way that I would make sense of that question is a little bit, and referring back to the psychedelics and some of the meditation experiences, is that, okay, so let's say we get to Mars and we do the material journey of going into space, but all I need is a mushroom trip to kind of go into Mars sort of immediately.
Yep.
So to blow that paradigm apart. So it depends on the perspective of progress. Like I was saying, that I'm sort of somewhat disappointed at progress and its ability to really bring sustained kind of contentment in a way that if I have this experience that the world is perfect as it is, like the whole idea of the soul coming in or souls going out, or whether they're happy to reincarnate, that the world is perfect as it is, that if you look at it from the point of view that this is a school for the soul, and whatever journey you choose to have here, or the learnings you want to have and the outcomes you want to have, this is the perfect place, because it's not meant, the world is not a problem to be solved. It's more like, this is the perfect place to do the thing of what you do here, and then either move on or stay with the experience. So what the journey will be in the materialist sense and the Maya sense, that the ever-evolving problem is that I will fix one pipe here and another ones will start to leak over there, will be the paradigm as long as we're on Earth, or even if we go to Mars, because it won't necessarily lift the frequency of our existing system. So that would be the thing, that it will forever surprise us, and the Maya will forever give us different kind of challenges to overcome and keep us interested. But if you want to go beyond it, you have to step outside of the paradigm of material time and space.
Wonderful. I have 100 questions coming out of that. One of my mentors, Lawrence Bloom, said to me, "You must have paid a lot of money in another dimension to experience this lifetime." I was like, wait, what?
What?
And I think you've just summarized that kind of an idea in a very powerful way. So can we explore that question and a bunch of others in a part 2?
Oh, I would absolutely love to.
All right. VESA, thank you for being with us. This was an amazing discussion covering 55 different areas, and we've got 255 more to go, which we'll cover at a second time. But super appreciate you being here with us.
Salim, thank you very much. It's a real honor.
I am so excited to announce the launch of our new OpenEXO platform. It's a game changer for those of us who are passionate about building a better future through the breakthroughs of new technology, plus new mechanisms for exponential organizations. First things first, the platform is home to the amazing Exponential Organizations 2.0 book, a living book, which means it's constantly updated with the latest case studies and the greatest breakthroughs in technology. ChatGPT, for example, is incorporated into the book already. With a basic membership of just $4 a month, you have access to all of the resources, 700 plus case studies. If you're not satisfied, you can cancel anytime. And it actually features a job board to help you connect with like-minded individuals, plus an AI-curated newsfeed that's head and shoulders above everybody else. So why not join today? Be part of a community that's working together to build a future. And for those of us who are ready to go full throttle, our premium membership offers even more perks. You'll have access to the courses and masterminds, communities of experts and thought leaders who are changing the game and building exponential organizations to transform the world. So what are you waiting for? Join us today and let's build a future together.
Don't forget to use the code EXOPASS to get 1 free month on openexo.com so you can read my new living book. That's EXOPASS.